I'm just going to get cracking. If people come in later on, then that's great. I'm just impressed that so many of you here at the last presentation of the day. Don't know whether that's a presentation or the passport prizes at the end, but I'll just assume it's the presentation. So it's been about a year since AlphaBay and Hanza were taken down, so I thought it might be a good opportunity to see whether that's had any lasting impact and what any changes may have been. My name is Michael Marriott, work for Digital Shadows. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm based in the San Francisco office. But there's kind of 5 things I want to cover today, and if there's one thing that you take away from this is that cybercriminal markets find a way to operate, of course, but the dark web model in particular seems to be in decline, which is in contrast to what we've seen in previous years. So a few of the trends that have emerged, AlphaBay did leave a huge gap, but only among the English-speaking community. Other language forums, perhaps, have remained the same. That gap hasn't been filled by existing markets. Previously, we've seen like a whack-a-mole since 2011 with Silk Road. That hasn't happened. That's due to a lack of trust, and I'll explain the reasons for that, and also the financial barriers, many of which are hidden to creating your own dark web market. So I'll talk through some alternative mechanisms and platforms that they're now turning to. When I was trying to explain what exactly a dark web marketplace was, I thought I'd go into a few aspects, such as the dark web is very obviously specific, so anything that's accessed through Tor or I2P, not just all of cybercrime. So a dark web criminal market is those markets that are based on those particular networks. And that's important because it's not just a general cybercrime forum in which they sell products and services. And I was going to talk about Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road and agorism and the economic models behind that. And then I got really bored, and I thought you might get a bit bored as well because it was the last presentation of the day. So I thought the best way to talk about why they're different and the specific nuances, I guess, of dark web marketplaces is, having met many of you last night, is beer. So here's my homebrew setup. Got all stereotypically San Francisco and started brewing my own beer. And here's our first setup, and it's pretty rudimentary and got some very mixed results of that. I don't know whether anybody here has actually brewed their own beer. Now, one of the things we struggled with was, well, you know, when you bottle it, you've got to put the dextrose in, and you get lots of variation in the fizziness. So we thought, let's get a Kegerator. That would be great. And so we just got that now, and we had to work out, where do we get this from? So we had 3 options. First of all, specialist store. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be brand sparkling new. It costs about $430 a day, so don't want to be part with that much. So we found one on Craigslist. 75 bucks. Who wouldn't go with that? Cheap, but yeah, a little bit risky. And we looked at the location of where they were selling it and probably don't want to be driving down there. So the happy medium, eBay. A little bit cheaper, but you've got all the vendor reviews as well. So you now see where I'm going after a very tenuous link from beer. And that's exactly what AlphaBay was doing. And this eBay model of selling goods on the dark web is something that Silk Road started in 2011 and isn't a coincidence. It's a really specific, defined way of selling goods online. So AlphaBay, the founder, who was arrested for it, explicitly said when they found it, they wanted to create the largest eBay-style marketplace on the dark web. And they largely achieved that. They got super popular. By the time it was taken down, there were about over 400,000 users, 40,000 vendors. They gained quite a bit of trust, at least in the English-speaking community, through adding things like Monero instead of Bitcoin. They did that when it was about $1 at the price, and that's obviously increased massively since. They actually made a fair amount from then, a fair amount of money. And so in total, I think they got about 23 million in revenue over the time, which came from taking a commission on the 1 billion that was traded on that platform. And there was a bunch of functionality that we can go into later if people are interested. So when it got taken down in July 2017, I'm not sure how familiar people are with the story, but it's pretty interesting, and it sets up how the market has evolved as well. So we talked about OPSEC in the previous talk and the importance of that, and this wasn't very evident with the founder of AlphaBay. He used his personal email address to send out emails in the early days, but fortunately he'd also registered his LinkedIn with that email as well, so made it really easy for the law enforcement guys who were going into it. So they managed to seize the site, arrest him in Canada, and they're about to take it down, but they coordinated it brilliantly with the Hanza takedown as well. So anybody that was flocking from AlphaBay then went to the biggest, next biggest, which was Hanza, but that had been in the hands of law enforcement since June the 20th. So they happily just took all these new registrants, got all their details, and that subsequently led to a load of arrests. Here's the administrator dashboard of Hanza, and they did it magnificently. They got all the registrations. They even disabled registration at one point. They were like, oh, too much. You need to wait for us to get on top of this. So people really got into signing up for this. One of the most amazing things that they did was they told all of the vendors, really, really sorry, but we've had a problem with one of our databases. So can you send us all the images that you've got for your things? And, oh, yeah. And obviously everybody forgot to strip out the metadata. So the police just knocked on everybody's door and said, brilliant, thanks for that. So yeah, loads of arrests since then of people that were on AlphaBay and flocked to Hanza. And when we were looking, there was a claim from the people who were making the arrest that this was going to have a huge impact on American businesses and American individuals over a long time. So we thought, what could be the three options for how it would evolve over time? So based on what's happened before, like the history of from 2011 onwards, an existing marketplace would just bubble up and fill the void that was left AlphaBay and Hanza. We'll see whether that happens. I'll go into that. The second one, would a new marketplace emerge? Again, we've seen this before, people just adapting this eBay-style model that was so popular in the past. The third option was, would people find alternative ways to do these transactions online? Would they abandon this specific dark web marketplace model and look for other ways of transacting online? So here's just, shows a few of the marketplaces since 2011 when Silk Road first forged this route. Silk Road 2, Agora. Agora's kind of the term, as I alluded to before, that Ross Ulbricht was taking in, having this underworld to transact goods free of the government. So there's this whole trend going through, and it was growing more and more and more and more. And by the time that AlphaBay was in its full zenith, it was about 10 times the size of Silk Road. The existing markets didn't do a very good job whatsoever. And you can kind of understand this given the two-pronged sting that law enforcement did. So people were very, very twitchy about whether Dream Market, which was the third biggest at the time, would actually manage to get in and attract the necessary demand. It's still going. Suspiciously, unlike any of the dark web marketplaces, it has zero downtime. So people are a little bit touchy about that. They very much suspicious that it's a law enforcement trap, and the UI is just, it's pretty awful, it's pretty hard to navigate. So somebody described it as a zombie market. It's technically alive, but the brain's dead. So that hasn't worked out. There's been new ones. This one is now down, so you can ignore my OPSEC fail, if anybody can spot that with the username. The Olympus Marketplace was one that cropped up and was gaining really, really in popularity. It was very snazzy, as you can see here. It's got lovely pastel colors, and the UI is amazing, and it was really, really gaining traction. But they ended up just shooting themselves in the foot. Trust is such a precious commodity that they just lost any faith that anybody had in them. We've seen that law enforcement are a key enemy of dark web markets, but also they're enemies to each other and their competitors. And there's a really annoying individual on the dark web community called Hugbunter, which is quite hard to say. But he basically he's a penetration tester for dark web markets. And he finds vulnerabilities in them, and then he alerts them and tries to get some money out of them. And he's got his own forum called Dread. And The leaders of Olympus didn't really like Dread, so they had this thread saying, right, we're in the process of hacking them, this is going to be awesome, we've got all this access, we're amazing, and that gained a lot of traction. And then it turned out what they'd actually done was they just paid one of the admins of Dread for access to their server, and they just took it down that way. So the community finds out, there's huge uproar, and then ends up nobody will take their advertisement anymore, so they can't really advertise their site. Nobody will go to the site, they don't trust them, so now that site is completely down and out. So poor Olympus, but yay for pastel color schemes. The second option is that new marketplaces would be created. And I think the key takeaway from this is that although it may seem really, really easy to have your own dark web marketplace, the evidence is to the contrary. We've seen there's a quite prestigious hacking forum called exploit.in, and they've been working on this market that you see up there, Market MS, for about 3 years now, so since 2015, but it's been in stealth mode. They've been slowly developing it, making it better, getting user feedback. And that's 3 years in terms of the life cycle, and it's still in beta mode. So they've got about 450 users, they've made a few sales, but they're just testing that out. And that's significant because exploit is really prestigious. They've got that to rest on, and they can have the trust that within the community. You've got a bunch of different funds that they can draw from. They've got their own network that they can advertise to. They've got their own Jabber channels that they can easily get loads and loads of consumers and vendors. And most significantly, they don't do drugs. And that's something that we saw with AlphaBay and Hanza was the sale of drugs online. And I think one of the main reasons why law enforcement opted to take it down in the end was due to the fact that they were selling fentanyl on there. The DEA got involved, and it kind of escalated from there. So it's a very conscious decision from Market.ms not to sell drugs on their site, very much sticking to the traditional hacking of kind of hacked RDP, malware, so on and so forth. They've also got their own Telegram channel, which is pretty typical of Russian-speaking criminals. They've been shifting to those kind of messaging apps for quite a while, and what we'll see later is that the English-speaking community have actually adopted that trend as well. So if the first element is that trust was super hit during Operation Bayonet, the second one is that there's actually quite a lot of financial cost to having a marketplace. You can get pretty much anything you want to run a dark web market online. You can rent the script for a store for $10 a month. You can pay somebody custom to build it. You can then get Bulletproof hosting for a decent one of these, probably $250 a month, which gives your own security. DDoS protection, get capture in there, about $3 a month. That's not a lot. Advertising, you're going to pay about $100, $150 a month to get your forum name or marketplace name going. So to super roughly add up some costs, it gets to about $4,000 a year to actually just have the basic running costs of the market. But if you take that as the AlphaBay model of taking 2%, you need to be having about $200,000 in sales within your site to actually just break even. And although it sounds super sexy and these dark web markets could be making loads, like the 23 million that AlphaBay was, actually the reality is that most of the goods are like a fraud guide for $1 or something like that. So in order to get all of those revenues going, you need to have quite an effort for advertising, and there are loads of hidden costs that I think are putting off a fair amount of people. So if those two things haven't happened, then how are people transacting online? Are the American people a lot safer than they ever were before? American businesses no longer need to worry about any cybercrime or stuff being sold online? Of course, that's not true. So there are four main trends that we've seen. The first one is switching to blockchain DNS instead of using .onion or Tor sites. There's been numerous examples of sites turning to this. You've got user vetting and more operational security measures in place, and then that includes the domain concealment that you see up there. And then the most significant one is the shift to peer-to-peer networks and messaging apps, as the Russian community have been doing for many years already. Tralfamadore market. That was one that was touted as the absolute future when AlphaBay went down, based on Ethereum blockchain, so there was no key individual that could have an OPSEC mistake and get everybody else in trouble. So they were advertising this across a bunch of different places. Unfortunately, it didn't manage to attract any pickup because it was just a little bit hard to use and people just couldn't get into using it. But the idea of a decentralized place based on blockchain was something that was potentially quite interesting. Now, one site that's done this really successfully is Joker's Stash, which is a notorious carding forum selling the latest restaurant hacked cards that they've managed to acquire. And they shifted about 2 weeks before the AlphaBay takedown to DNS hosting, so with a .bazaar domain that you can see up there. All you need is an extension and you can access that domain. So in theory, this hosting it on blockchain will make it more resilient and less susceptible to law enforcement takedowns. One of the ways in which they managed to take down dark websites was, it's kind of assumed that, oh, it's hosted on the dark web, so it's like really secure because it's on the dark web. But obviously they're all based on servers, and I think Dutch law enforcement are working with a Dutch organization that rents servers to criminal sites, and then they just sit on these, and when law enforcement need a bit of help, they just give them access. So people are really, really aware that just because it's on an onion site doesn't mean it's necessarily secure. So potentially DNS blockchain. Another site to have adopted this is Bazaar, which again uses the .bazaar TLD, and they're selling a variety of different goods and services. We kept our eye on this for about a 4-month period just to see what sort of user base and goods it was attracting. And you saw across that period about 4,000 new users sign up. So steady, not in the hundreds of thousands like we saw with AlphaBay, but a good level of uptake for Bazaar. So we'll be keeping our eye on that one and how it develops. The second area is domain concealment. Now, I think actors are being a lot more savvy about how they advertise their particular site or their service. There's this constant trade-off between, right, how do we advertise our site and how do we not leave ourselves open to attack by competitors or law enforcement? So it's really hard to get that balance, and one way that we've seen people turning to more is they'll advertise their site on a forum, but they won't give actually the domain or the URL that people can access that with, and you've got to ping them and get a personal message and get the URL there and go from there. And a great example is the Genesis market, and this is a really interesting one. I was in the talk earlier on the fantastic talk on phishing and tracking the phishing kits, and one of the takeaways was that they're getting more than just your credentials. They're getting additional pieces of information which attackers find really, really useful when they're trying to use your hacked accounts or your credit card information. And that's been a real challenge for criminals and fraudsters. You can have credit card details and you can have account details, but due to like anti-fraud measures, you need to make sure you're in the right area, you've got various fingerprints and browser information that make you look convincing. So traditionally, the approach has been, right, we'll just rotate that information so we're not necessarily on a blacklist, and that's kind of been how fraud operates. Genesis market, on the other hand, they have automatic web inject, so you get banking information straight into one user, and you hire that bot. And the bot perfectly emulates a user. So you've got their browser information, cookie information, you've got logons, you've got banking information. So when they're looking at committing fraud, they can use all of that, they can imitate the user, and it's so much easier for them. They've got an extension that you can do this, so you just, when you're browsing, you just add it in and go ahead and commit your fraud. So a quite interesting, exciting market that's emerged, but again, using this domain concealment to make sure they've got the balance between OPSEC and advertising. And the final one is it's the shift to Telegram and Discord. So people turning to these chat apps that the Russian-speaking community have been using for a long time, and that's a way to share hacked accounts. You can advertise various ways to cash out, different fraudulent goods and services. And the UI is pretty handy as well. As I said, one of the problems with Dream Market was the fact that it was a pretty horrible UI to use. So Telegram, you can have some really interesting features, and who doesn't love a chatbot? It's a Telegram marketplace that uses these chatbots to a really, really good effect. You can go on and you've got various different vendors selling different services, and you can tap one particular button and you can go in and get a fraudulent holiday. You can spend your forgotten payment cards in a whole host of different ways. So Limp Market is a really good example of one of those marketplaces that people are turning to sell their goods online. We did a little look across our archive of criminal forums and marketplaces, and we saw that there's been a huge uptick in the amount of Telegram links that are shared across there, both for people's individual Telegrams and then also for kind of group invitations. I think it was about 5,000 links that were shared versus about 1,000 compared to this time last year. So real uptick in particularly Telegram, but also Discord as well. Discord is very much like Telegram, but just a little bit more for low-level actors. So people selling hacked accounts and configuration files for credential stuffing tools, things like that. So Discord is one, also had an uptick, but not quite to the level that Telegram has. So looking forward, because I'm aware that I'm the one thing keeping you between beer and passport prizes. So I'll wrap up. There are 5 factors that will shape how this will develop over the next year or so, and they're up on the screen there. You've got the adoption, so how many people basically will join the site, which will shape in many respects how successful it is. You've got what kind of content is on there, and you see so many times that on these markets you've got rippers, so people trying to scam people. You've got just rubbish goods that haven't got any value to anybody. So how well can they get rid of those? Vendors, how many features are there that make it appealing for those? What's the commission rate? How can they make it appealing for vendors? And there's things like some secure communications. Seen pretty much everywhere is adopting escrow services on their markets. So how can they make sure that the people will get the money for the goods that they're providing and vice versa? And then the last one that I've talked about a fair bit is user experience. How can you make it really, really appealing to the user base to actually use the site itself? So I think those are the 5 areas that we're going to see emerge over time. And if it's one that I think people should look out for, this isn't a dark web marketplace. This is a forum on the clear web that is protected, market MS, that's come from the exploit.in community and is really, really gaining traction. And again, it's been there since 2015, so they've been able to use the trust that they had amongst the community to get that going. So we shall see how that develops, but one to keep an eye on, as I say. We've got a paper, so if you want to read the paper, you can do so. It goes into a bit more detail on some of these trends. So download that if you fancy a copy, or reach out to me. I can give you details after the show, or grab me for a beer at the end, and we can have a chat about it. So any questions or not, and then we can just convene afterwards. Okay. Happy days. Thank you.